I'm very skeptical of scientists who say things that can't be done because they're looking at the current science and then they're ignoring the normal trajectory of science. But all those things in Star Trek came true, right? They even had that type of communicator became flip cell phones. And science fiction has been constantly influencing science, driving it along. The first computer system on board the Apollo that went to the moon had the first laptop in it. And that laptop was named Spock. And that just shows you that the scientists who really accomplish things are science fiction readers. And they don't sit around saying, oh, this is never going to happen and this can't be done.
This is the future.
Hello and welcome to the Alternate Futures podcast, where we chat with indie sci-fi creators about their work, the world, and anything in between or beyond. Today, I'm here with Ben Parris. Ben is a longtime Science Museum executive director and NASA consultant and has delivered over 100 science education lectures in the northeastern United States. As a former Scholastic magazine columnist and Edutopia contributor, his articles and fiction have appeared in a wide variety of publications. He overcame dyscalculia to complete his education at Brooklyn College and shows some symptoms of synesthesia. His background and work experience have provided him a wealth of material to draw upon for his novels. Hi, Ben. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Edwin. Thanks for having me.
So I am curious to start with the NASA consultant part, actually. So what's that like, and what kind of projects have you consulted on?
Right. So, first of all, I joined their System Ambassadors program as one of the first, and that's been going strong all these years since late 2000. So, we're talking about a quarter century of that. And in the meantime, they tapped me for help their training program. So they constantly have NASA engineers, NASA executives speaking to the press. And since my background is in popularizing science, teaching, being an explainer, they asked me to give pre-interviews to all these guys before their press interviews. So there would be a big event coming up, and they would have me get on at 4 a.m. because that's the only way to beat the regular press. So at 4 a.m, we'd get up and do this pre-interview, and then 6 a.m, they'd be on Good Day New York or something like that. And they'd be all prepped up.
Wow. So you must have really met a lot of the movers and shakers in NASA then.
I did. And not only that, I was even there. I was in the room on speakerphone at some critical moments, at the very moment that humanity broke through the barrier of the solar system, when Voyager first hit the termination shock, as they call it. So
Right.
that was very exciting. We had a whole discussion on the air about that.
Right. When was that?
Maybe 2007.
How was it that long?
I think I was still with the Science Museum at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Because how close is it? It's still quite a long ways from the edge of the heliosphere, is it? Or
Yeah, so there's all kinds of landmarks that they didn't realize. They thought they were getting to the end, and they didn't understand that due to galactic wind, the whole solar system envelope is skewed. So that if you go out one side, the solar system will seem to end much sooner. And if you go the other side, it's going to take much longer because the output of our sun is what creates this versus the pressure from other suns create a bubble around us.
right.
That's the bubble that's pushed to the side. And that's the thing we were talking about. I was saying it's like a bow wave. And they're saying, oh, you really think so? Because that's the way we modeled it. That's great. And I was so surprised that the scientists were taking my input on that, my amateur input. Yeah.
So are we going out the big side or the small side then?
The big side.
We're going to take a long time then.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, well, maybe they'll send another one at some point and wait another 40 years for it to
Well,
get
they keep finding that there's another layer of asteroid belt further and further out, and they don't understand why the sun has the ability to hold on to all these rocks so far away. That's part of what they're finding out.
So there's the Oort cloud, the Kuiper belt, and then there's something else as well?
Yes, the Oort cloud is something that was long theorized And that they've had some confirmation for, but now they think there's even more beyond that.
Yeah, the more we get out there, the more we learn, isn't it?
Right.
So so I mean, you're a science museum director, and I mean, you've just demonstrated a little bit of what you do. How long have you been doing that, and what's that like?
So I was doing that since the late 90s up until 2009. Now I'm strictly a teacher. I teach English and science. I just don't have the physical ability to put in 80 hours a week anymore. It was like working in an emergency room.
Right.
The emergency was that we were struggling to build the place from scratch. It was absolutely great. It was a lifelong ambition. I went a couple of different directions. When I was in high school, I really wanted to be a physicist. And then I discovered that higher math was not for me. And it occurred to me that if I could maybe train and inspire other people to be physicists and other people that launch into science careers, that would be more suitable for me, that I could back off doing science myself and just maybe shape science education. And I was always looking for that opportunity when it came along. I had already some building blocks because in order to run a science museum, a lot of people don't realize this, you need a financial background to do it properly. And so I took a lot of science courses, including planetology, which was great. And all of this came in handy, plus my financial background. And I'd already by then had a lot of experience working with nonprofits. Someone called me thinking that I'd be good for their fundraising. And then I ended up on the board of directors. And then when we actually launched, I ended up in that top position. So it was great.
Wow. Okay. Interesting how those kind of things happen, isn't it? So you had or have dyscalculia? I wonder if you could split, because from reading the
Yeah, so I
description,
have a
yeah.
problem where, well, first of all, that's my learning disability. It's a math learning disability where basically I'll put a vast amount of effort into learning math. And even when I teach it, I have to reteach myself math just before I teach it to someone else because it all goes out of my head right after that. And so that's what makes it so difficult. But I have also another symptom that's even more rare, which is that it affects my conscious ability to count, or even my waking subconscious ability to count. So even though humans have an inherent sense of time, and I do as well, I have a perfect sense of time when I'm asleep. I can wake up right to the minute if I have to. But as soon as I wake up, and this is akin to epilepsy, there's a storm of electrical activity that blocks my time sense.
Hmm.
And that's been my biggest problem in life. I couldn't even pay my bills on time.
Right. So do you like
It's
surround
horrible.
yourself with clocks or something
I
then?
surround myself with clocks and constant reminders, and I'm writing down every appointment in many places and telling other people to remind me. It's pretty awful. But as a result, I mostly end up places exactly when I should be there because of all these precautions. But in other instances where it's not, if I'm not keeping a class waiting or a person waiting or podcast waiting, then I usually let it slip. And then there's some bad results.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that I feel a bit bad because you're like one of the few people that I haven't reminded by email in advance, and you're probably the one person I should have made sure to remind as well. But you were here on time anyway, so that was great.
Because of my systems, my redundant systems.
Well, there you go. They work, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, before we get to your writing, I'm going to jump in a little bit because I read in preparation for the interview, I read Mars Armor Forged, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But there was one thing I wanted to bring up, which was one of the characters had a connection to Thunder Bay. And I was wondering if you have any connection to Thunder Bay yourself.
No, I'm afraid not. I just read an article about it and I was interested. And that's usually what triggers these things, especially when I was first writing that book. I was just building stacks of articles about different settings and people and science. And then I just dig through all of that. Whatever affected me, I just decided to put in. So I do have a lot of Canadian relatives. I just found out later in life and did get a chance to meet them. But yes, Toronto and really scattered all over Canada. I have relatives. So it's not like I don't have any connection.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting because I am actually from that area of the world.
Oh, and you're from that area.
So,
That's great.
I mean, Thunder Bay is the nearest big city to where I grew up. And I was actually born on the northern coast of Lake Superior. And my family has been in paper mill towns and cities for much of their existence. So,
I suppose that people from around there are very hardy and they probably are better candidates to survive on Mars. And that was really why I was drawing from that.
okay. Because they do I believe it's Sudbury, have an area where they trained for moon missions.
There you
So,
go.
so that's
Yeah.
interesting. So, kind of moving on to the writing side of things, I wanted to go into your sort of path to writing, but I wanted to also bring up the fact that we've, let's say, known of each other for now almost 18 years. And we've never met before, but we interacted first on writing.com and probably back in 2006, 2007. I was just curious your experience on that. I just looked it up and it still exists. I haven't been on it for a long time. What was your experience on the platform? And was that new to you getting into the writing community, or was that something that you'd been involved in for some time?
Yeah, so that was amazing. I have been in many large and small writing groups over the years, but that was a unique experience to have an online writing group. It was a deep bench, so many participants, so much attention, and so much encouragement and a sense of community. Here we are, we're all at some point amateur writers and just trying to help each other out. The community was so wonderful, different from the in-person writer groups in that the piece sat there and people were able to go over it at their leisure and really work in depth and give comments in depth. And I've saved all of that from going back to, I think, end of 2004 when I first joined it. I have all those comments on the early chapters of Mars Armor Forged, Weight of Aquataine, and everything else.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I remember it as a really positive, vibrant community for sure. And from that came the Far Space One anthology, which you were part of, that I published and kind of disappeared. But I've been getting a little bit of attention regarding it recently, so I might put it back out there. We'll see.
What year was that?
2008. Yeah, 2008 I have listed as the copyright.
Okay.
Yeah. So
That corresponds to when I had my first novel out.
which novel was that?
That was Weight of Aquitaine.
Right, okay. Because yeah, you do mention it in the bio in Far Space One. So
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Because I noticed, well, we'll get into actually, I won't jump ahead, but I did notice with Mars Armored Forged, I saw something in your bio, I think it was on your website, where you mentioned you actually started writing that possibly back in the 80s.
Yes, all the way back in 1989. 1989 was the year of the cold fusion scandal.
Right, I remember that.
And it occurred to me that, to take that a step further, what if I've got a couple of dishonest scientists who are monkeying around, maybe? Well, not really. I would say one of them was dishonest. The other one was very scrupulous, but he had some personal quirks, and he was, I guess, sloppy and maybe naive, so that his partner was able to manipulate him.
Right.
And this then kind of combined with my interest in Mars, because I had an interest in Mars going way back before I was involved with NASA. And yeah, so I started writing it in 1989. I had no idea how to write a novel. I drafted it as a short story right away. And then I just kept lengthening it. I kept revising and adding to it, adding characters, scenes, ideas. And then when I had a decent length draft, I started circulating it. And I sent it to a famous author's wife who had become a literary agent. She told me that it's unsaleable. She says, good book, but it's unsaleable because no one will ever print a book about Mars again. Because we are post 1964 now. And in 1964, we took a good look at the planet. We found out no one's living there. She says science fiction readers lost all interest in Mars. Little did I know, her husband had just written a book about Mars, and that was coming out in a few months. And at the same time, there was a whole new wave of science fiction writers writing about Mars. So I have that letter from her. I have encouragement from another literary agent saying she's all wrong. And then I went back to writing the book.
So was that then the beginning of your writing career, writing process, the love of writing?
Yeah, that's kind of late in life for me, actually. That was really, I was almost 30 years old and I had not had a decent idea for a novel until then. Prior to that, when I was in high school, I went to Abraham Lincoln High School in Brooklyn. And there was a former student from half a century earlier. His work was required reading, not only in our school, but in every high school across the country. Things like The Crucible and Death of a Salesman. He sat in that very classroom, in that very English classroom that I was in, and they didn't think much of him when he went to high school. So, so I thought that was a good sign. But I got inspired at that point. People said early on that my dialogue was good, and I started focusing first on playwriting. And then when I was in college, I took a playwriting course. That play, the play that I wrote as my term project, floated around Hollywood for about 10 years. And then they made it into 1 hour made for TV movie, one of these disposable little movies that you never hear about again. It was a Turner Broadcast Network. So that was really my first success in writing.
Yeah. Was that a financial success at all for you?
No, no, no.
Yes, that's what happens too much as well, isn't it?
Neither was Mars Armor Forged a financial success. The only book I made money on was Weight of Aquataine.
We'll touch on that a little bit. It's mostly fantasy, I think.
Fantasy science
Yes,
fiction.
okay, fantasy.
What I wanted was that the reader should be able to find complete explanations of what's going on, both fantasy explanation and science fiction explanation.
So now you have also gone on to produce some of your own anthologies post Far Space One.
I edited anthologies and I had a few stories in each one myself.
So what made you sort of get inspired to do a few anthologies?
Well, we come from the same roots. Here was all this talent at writing.com, and I found out you could run a writing contest, and the best of the writing contest, they were all publishable, maybe with a little TLC added, but they had such potential. There are people on there who are hobbyists, who are the most amazing writers. I had put somebody in there, one of my favorite stories of all time. She never wrote a story again. And
Yeah.
she never attempted to publish anything. And even that, she wouldn't have been publishing anything except for my writing contest. And then there was another person who posted something and won another of my writing contests. And then she got off writing.com and vanished. And I didn't know her name. I didn't know her real name. And it took me a year to hunt her down and then finally put that anthology together. But I also sought out some big names to kind of anchor it and see if I could really get them to move. So I was fortunate enough to get George Clayton Johnson into one of my anthologies, and then other people. Well, Jack McDevitt. I got Jack McDevitt in.
So how did those anthologies do?
They had like a steady drip over the years on Amazon, but outside of Amazon, if I took them with me, if I made a speech and I had a table full of books, they've always sold very well at that.
Yeah, that was my impression, sort of the in-person thing. I know a guy who started his own anthology publishing company here. He just went for sort of big name British authors to do stories, and then he would bring and sell them at the science fiction conventions, basically.
That's the thing. I mean, the name really helps, but I was there talking to my customers, talking up the great first time talent that was in the books. I love some of those stories.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. The writing.com is I still think of it. I mean, it's a very positive experience and some great people on there. Like I say, I think we had the same experience, right? Just so much talent there. I just want to help these people get their stories out.
Well, exactly. And it's mutual. And they helped me so much.
Yeah.
I mean, even if the comments weren't always the professional grade editing, they were encouragement because you want to get the reader reaction, like a pure reader reaction, as much as the professional reaction.
You're working on, you continue to write then, presumably. And I was just wondering, sort of, do you have a writing schedule since you also keep a day job as many writers do?
I do have a writing schedule at this point. It's not as efficient as that of some of my friends, but I go to this in-person writing group on Tuesday nights, and the material has to be ready for it. So I have to produce 10 minutes of reading material every week. And you do that, you have a book in a year. So that's not so terrible. So I wrote a book called Creds, The Iris Adventure. And now I'm writing the sequel to that. I just read that last night. It's got humor in it. People love it. They love the characters. The weird thing about that one is I'm writing it without an outline. Just
Okay.
going week to week. And just because I've got so many plot structures in my head, I want to see if I can, just from an understanding of plot structure, whether I can bring it together without planning it in advance.
All right. So usually you do plan and plot fairly seriously then?
I do, especially I want to know where it's going to end up. In the case of Weight of Aquataine, I wrote the first chapter and the last chapter back to back.
So what would your outlines look like? Because I know they vary from one of the early ones I did myself, because I don't really like to outline in great detail, but I do find it helps. I do like a paragraph for each chapter or something. But some people, obviously, I'm aware of, will write like, dozens and dozens of pages for their outline. Where do you fall in that range, I guess?
It depends. I've experimented with a whole different range of things. The most elaborate that I got was I had a point by point detailed outline that was based on plot points, and that ran about 6 pages. Then I did the paragraph a chapter thing, plus I did a synopsis that ran about 20 pages. And I also then had a whole bunch of explorations. It's like, what if my main villain was standing up on the platform giving a speech? What would he say? That was completely scrapped. I hated the way that came out, but the exploration was important.
Right. So that's interesting. It's obviously a good way to get to know your characters and sort of dig deeper in your story without having to, like many people will explore this, well, discover the story as they're writing it, kind of explore it with their characters. So how much time do you take in this exploration phase before you kind of start working, or does it sort of merge into the written novel as it?
I'm very slow because as I'm exploring, I'm also doing deep research. Weight of Aquitaine was also a historical novel because it's time travel. He's visiting these different time periods. And I wanted all of that to be bulletproof, all the way down to, he's walking from town to town. And I want to know who was the mayor of that town that year. And I want to know what were their industries, what were their trade routes like, what would you find in their markets. Well, and just absolutely anything I could think of in terms of world building. And I was doing this original research. And then later on, other writers told me they don't do that. I mean, some of them do that, obviously, but there are some really successful authors out there who simply skip that and just wing it. They wing it from everything they've absorbed. They don't sit down and do a special research for it. And they're much more successful than I am, by the way, because you got to get something done.
Yeah.
Because 1989 to 2011, that's how long it took me to finish Mars Armor Forged. Weight of Aquitaine went relatively quickly. I started writing that in 2005, which is what I call my miracle year, when I really had all this output. So 2005 until end of 2007, that was Weight of Aquitaine. And then I had to do some revision in 2008. I kind of hurried up. When we get to the marketing part of this, I'll tell you that whole story.
So what I'm curious, I mean, obviously you do a lot of research. Now, I don't do a lot of that kind of research because I'm a bit lazy, so I create fictional worlds generally. Do you think that it's a good idea to delve quite deeply in your fictional world so that you have a really strong understanding of how it works? Or is it kind of just as much as you need to?
Well, as far as completely made up worlds, I think you still need that. I mean, if it's science fiction, you still need to do some research to see what's possible.
Right.
And that's tricky because, especially when we started writing, so little was known. In the 1980s, no one even knew for sure that there were other planets. We had scientists saying, doubting it.
Yeah.
They were saying, you've got all this science fiction based on visit other planets. We don't know there's another planet. Right?
It's hard
Earth
to
could be
imagine
unique.
now, isn't it? But yeah, I remember up until the early 90s, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're in the 90s, they started finding these exoplanets. As a matter of fact, there was an article just before they found the first exoplanet, an article by a prominent scientist saying this is nonsense.
Then they find them, and now they find them everywhere, and now it's just accepted that they're around every star,
Right.
basically. Yeah. You have written a book on writing, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
So what initiated that, and what was that process like?
Well, because with every job I've ever had, they enlisted me to be a teacher. It's like, all right, you're doing your work and also teach everybody else to do it. So I was kind of used to that. If I'm writing, I'm also teaching it. It was the most natural thing in the world. So I did start putting that book together over a period of time. I took my teaching lessons and worked them up into a book. And since then, I've revised my approach many times. Really, that book is overdue for a new edition. That was the process. I just couldn't help it. Let's put it that way.
Okay. And that's called Today You Write the Book. Is
That's
that
right.
correct? Yeah. So we'll
That's
look for
right.
a new edition if you get inspired to write it then.
Thank you.
So regarding research, it did come across to me in Mars Armor Forged that you must have done a lot of research. I mean, obviously you're a NASA consultant, a science museum director. Did you already have a lot of knowledge to bring to that in that regard, or did you still have to really do your homework?
Yeah, it's both. It never ends. Everything overlapped and everything created a synergy where one thing helped another. However, I did still need to do a lot of research. And part of it is it's cutting edge stuff. So I'm very skeptical of scientists who say things that can't be done because every time they say things can't be done, they're looking at the current technology
Right.
and they're looking at the current science and then they're ignoring the normal trajectory of science. But all those things in Star Trek came true, right?
Yeah.
That they even had that type of communicator became flip
Flip
cell
phone. Yeah.
phones ultimately. And science fiction has been constantly influencing science, driving it along. The first computer system on board Apollo, the Apollo that went to the moon had the first laptop in it, and that laptop was named Spock. And that just shows you that the scientists who really accomplish things are science fiction readers, and they don't
Yeah.
sit around saying, "Oh, this is never going to happen, and this can't be done." So it's those scientists that I really like to follow. And so research wise, I had the privilege being a science museum head. I had the privilege to go out to universities and talk to their science programs and talk to some of the people working on cutting edge science and find out some things that were not released to the general public. And then you don't have to have a complete understanding of this. I never was going to, but as long as you have characters who don't have a complete understanding of it and they're just living in that world.
Right.
So all you have to know is something might be feasible. And that's what I was going on.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. I agree with you in regards to the people who say, "Oh, you can't put that in your science fiction because it doesn't exist." It's all, but it's kind of like science fiction writers and science fiction itself is like the imagination for scientists in many ways, right? They're the ones that build the stuff that we imagine in a way. As long
Robert
as it's,
Goddard said that he was inspired by Jules Verne.
and then there are the scientists who are also science fiction writers as well. Arthur C. Clarke, for example, and things like that. I think David Brin as well, to go to the US side of things. But yeah,
Arthur C. Clarke, one of my favorite heroes of all time, he's really responsible for much of our modern world because he's the one who conceived of the geostationary satellite in
right. Yeah.
1945.
We still haven't built his space elevator yet, but maybe we'll get there
Right,
from 2001.
right, exactly.
But I guess now we're on every author's favorite part, which is the marketing and promotion. How did you find that process?
Well, I think for any true creative, marketing is a nightmare. I mean, you can be creative at marketing, but you want to spend that time writing your books. So I got lucky just that one time with the weight of Aquataine because 2007 was the year I was just polishing up a draft of it. And Weight of Aquataine happened to be the first book with a synesthete hero in it. A synesthete hero. He has superpowers caused by his crossed senses. And this is long before it became a subgenre of its own.
I didn't even know it was a subgenre.
It is a subgenre. There's over 100 books now.
Wow.
Where there's synesthete heroes in them.
You're a trailblazer then.
It's not just science fiction. There's a famous series of a detective who's a synesthete. So in 2007, I had this offer from Tor Books that I didn't like. They offered to cut 20,000 words out of my book.
Wow.
And not only that, but they told me which parts they wanted to cut specifically, and I felt like the book needed that. So I turned them down, and I was lucky I turned them down because when Amazon came along with its Kindle launch, I still had the rights. And I think that if Tor had the rights, they wouldn't have done it. I don't think they would have put my book, the book of a brand new novelist, into this process. But as a result, I was still able to control the process. Kindle went live with 50 books, and I was in the launch package with Weight of Aquataine. I was the first person out there because I also had some journalist jobs. I worked for newspapers. So I was the first one to write a favorable article about Kindle. And then I was in the launch package. There's only 50 books you can buy. One of them was mine. And because of the article I wrote, I got written up by the Chicago Tribune and the whole set of Tribune papers. That national attention launched my book into the Kindle bestseller lists. And within a year, there were thousands, maybe 10,000 Kindle books. Everybody rushed into it at that point. All the authors wanted to be in it. And a year later, I was still on the Kindle bestseller lists within my category. So, you know how they have subcategories of science fiction / war stories, science. So within my subcategories, I was still hitting number 1, 2, and 3 every week.
Wow, excellent.
And it was just lucky timing.
Yeah, right book in the right time. Yeah. I remember that period. That was like a wild west of ebooks and publishing.
Yeah. So you want to be in the Wild West.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a good segue, I think, Weight of Aquataine, because the first thing I wanted to talk about, I guess, as we get into your books, and I said most of the time I spent on Mars Armor Forged, but I'm really interested in the synesthetic character. I haven't read, like I said, I didn't know there was a subgenre around that, so I haven't read anything. I might go look at some of them now because I'm considering putting one in one of my books. So can you describe that and then sort of what the process is for writing, especially a character that will have experiences that are foreign to most people?
Yes. So synesthesia, when people know about it, is best known for, now I'm gonna call this more conventional, but it's still very, very strange, where maybe a musician's success is built on the fact that they can remember a musical piece very well because when they hear a note, it's associated with a color. They see a color floating in the air. And then when you have a number of notes, there's a color blend that comes out of it. And that blend represents the whole piece. And it also helps you with your pitch. So you can be pitch perfect because of that. And I also had perfect pitch. There was a time when I was being urged to go into music because of that, but I wasn't interested. So that is strange enough, and that is crossed senses. And basically, the human brain has a set of sense barriers built into it so that your senses don't cross. And the way I like to explain it is almost everyone experiences synesthesia when they hit their head. A blow to the head will cause the sense barrier to come down, and you will see stars. So when you do that, I mean, you shouldn't have the ability to see something when you get a pain. But this is natural. It can happen to anyone. So when you have synesthesia of any degree, the sense barriers are down or limited, and then the sense is crossed. But some very strange things can happen when the sense is crossed. I mean, people with synesthesia typically see each letter, printed letters in different colors. But some people with the rarer versions of synesthesia see the letters as maybe with different textures. Maybe the letters are actually wearing discernible clothes. Things have a personality. It sounds like insanity. So that's why people tend not to talk about it.
Right. Yeah. I can imagine.
Now, I personally have for many years had what was a problem to me. As we got towards the end of the years, the days appeared to get taller, and I had felt I needed to climb over them. As we got closer and closer to December 31, that it was just more and more difficult for me to climb over those days. And so that's part of the synesthesia experience.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I never experienced it quite that way, but it definitely feels that way, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I started doing some research on synesthesia, and I found out that there were studies done as far back as the 1920s where some very rare synesthetes had stranger and stranger results to the point where the synesthesia was actually triggering other effects like precognition. So I took all of this into account and I said, what if I had a character who is one of these extremely rarest of synesthetes? And when I found out that acupuncture has a different effect on a synesthete than it has on anyone else, and it has a different effect than the synesthete is used to in their life. So typically, when you're synesthete, you have a one-to-one correspondence locked in for your entire life, but between one effect and another. So if you hear a middle C and you see a splash of orange, you're going to have that in childhood. You're going to have that until the day you die. It's locked in, and it's one for one. It's one result from one trigger. Acupuncture is different. As the needle goes in, the response changes. So it's going into different depth levels, and these are extremely small, obviously. It's only the thickness of your skin, but it causes multiple reactions in the synesthete. And it occurs to me, what if at the bottommost level of that needle, and the needle has to go into a particular place. There's one place it has to go into, it has to reach the bottom depth, and then maybe the rarest of synesthetes can bend space and time. But he has to work on it, he has to practice, get good at it. And in the case of Wade of Aquataine, he needed some help. So this fellow synesthete who lived 1,200 years earlier and can see him forward in time, she also has to pull him while he is in this condition of having opened up this unused portal in his brain. She then has to pull him back to her time. So all of that comes together, and that this was his first experience traveling back in time, whether he liked it or not.
It's quite an extrapolation. Yeah, that's interesting.
Quite an extrapolation. Thank you.
So, do they know what causes synesthesia? I've heard that it's the thought, at least the suggestion, that all people are born synesthetic and then their brains differentiate based on signals they receive. Is there anything to that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And that's what I was getting at. Anything that can go wrong with the human brain and body will go wrong at some point. The body is designed to go through these stages. A lot of things happen when you're an embryo where you go through these stages, but also it continues from childhood onwards. There are many more children that have synesthesia than adults because the walls come down, basically. You're open. As a child, you're open to all of these things, and the senses can mix. Some people never experience it, even in childhood, but if you're going to experience it, it's going to either be in childhood or it's going to be when you hit your head.
Okay.
So it is just a natural thing.
Thanks. So have you gone to acupuncturists to see if you can experience anything interesting?
So acupuncture works especially well on me. I didn't experience, I didn't bend space and time, but I
Well,
did get my carpal tunnel cured within just 2 sessions.
wow.
I went to a neurologist who did a nerve conduction test before and after, and it was confirmed that I had carpal tunnel. And 2 acupuncture sessions later, I had no more carpal tunnel.
Wow, that's
That
impressive.
also, those experiences went into the book.
I'm gonna have to check that out then. I'm really curious about these kind of things. So the book that I read for preparing for this is Mars Armored Forged. There's a lot of interesting things in this. Was this the first book you started writing as a that formed
Yes,
into a
it is.
novel back in
It's not the
the
first
late
book I
80s?
finished, but it's the first
Right.
book I started writing.
So, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll let you summarize it and then we can sort of pick a few parts that were really interesting for me.
Reviews of my books summarized it a lot better than I could, particularly because one of the reasons I love science fiction is because of the sheer complexity of it. And so my ideas tend to be complex. But essentially, you've got a few situations merging on a collision course. And that collision course involves this crooked scientist who wants to test out his catalyst on Mars. He's got a catalyst to trigger geothermal energy, and he figures, what if you can restart a dormant volcano? And you've got volcanoes on Mars. And the situation is vulnerable because one of the prime places to build a colony on Mars would be around its biggest volcano at the base of it. And so we have this young colony on Mars. We have difficulties on Earth. The Martian colony's struggling, but it's going to get a huge boost if they put the Olympics on Mars. You put the Olympics on Mars, it's going to be absolutely spectacular. It's going to be unlike anything ever seen on Earth because of the low gravity. And so many new things can happen, particularly in jumping, but you take some of the other sports as well, like skiing, and who knows what can happen with that. And I was particularly a big ski enthusiast and a big Olympics enthusiast. So I brought all that in. I figured the best way to sustain myself and actually get through the process of writing a whole novel is to take all of my interests. If I'm already fascinated with it, it's going to carry me forward. So part of my research for that, by the way, was watching all these tapes I had of the various Olympics and what happened
Okay.
on the ski slopes. So that's the idea. It's the Olympics, it's a revolution brewing on Mars, and it's the idea of geothermal energy and also politics on Earth, all coming to a head and clashing in this one great debacle. Anything to that, I'd appreciate it.
No, no, it is. It's a on the face of it, a fairly absurd idea that the Olympics in on Mars in 2038. And well, we'll get into a few things of how you developed it and sort of answered some of the obvious questions, or at least brought up more questions about those questions. Let's say one of the things I was interested in, because you said like the way you described it in the blurb I have here, an astonishing chain of political intrigue lands the 28th Winter Olympics in 2038 on Mars. And it really sort of highlights, and I mean, when you wrote this, it was probably less obvious, but the corruption of these big institutions, the Olympic Committee, we see all the time, FIFA corruption, and even things like the UN and EU and things like that, all these large bodies. So it is fascinating how you wove that corruption in there as well. So they have the Olympics on Mars, but then there are all these forces that are trying to, like you say, take Mars in an independent direction from Earth as well, already, even in the short amount of time that Mars has
Right.
been colonized. Yeah, you mentioned one of the books that came to mind reading it was the John Carter series. There's also Total Recall comes to mind here because there is, let's say we're in a sort of middle stage of terraforming, perhaps past the initial phase, but into the second phase, perhaps. And that was interesting. I was quite curious about that side because you did have a character who brought up the idea of how do you think we got here so fast, right? Because literally that's what is it, 13 years away from now. And you wrote it a bit longer
2011.
ago, but still, that would have been very fast, even if it got going at that point. So I guess what my question is, do you think we could do that if there was the political will? I think you base it, if I'm not mistaken, on climate issues going on in the world that inspired the leaders to try and get us off the planet or something.
So Werner von Braun, who ran our Apollo program, he laid out a plan in 1957 how we could get to Mars with existing technology or near existing technology. And basically, it was extremely elaborate and extremely expensive. But that's always been the case. If you can break out of Earth's gravity well, we've had the math since the 1800s, how you could get to Mars. So if you had the political will, if you had the money and one willing to spend it, you could accelerate the program. It doesn't take that long to get to Mars and start colonizing it. In the 1990s, Dr. Robert Zubrin came out with a book called Mars Direct, and he laid out a new plan. This was the first major revision from Tsiolkovsky and from using the Hohmann transfer, using Werner von Braun's ideas. This was the first major revision. And Dr. Zubrin said, let's streamline this. You start sending supplies there before you send humans there. It seemed obvious at the time, but no one else had thought of that. Not only that, he's like, send factories there, send automated factories, start producing oxygen, start doing everything you need to do robotically. And based on his blueprint, which is adopted by most Mars enthusiasts and technologists who are thinking about Mars and absorbed into Elon Musk's plans as well, it became significantly easier to go to Mars on a fairly short time frame. Now, I was at my science museum. One of the people on my board of directors was the guy who ran the computers. He was completely in charge of the computers for the Apollo mission. He was a Northrop Grumman guy, or Grumman in those days, and he knew what he was talking about. He told me that they had lost the blueprints for the Atlas V rocket, which was amazing. Somebody has those in his house somewhere.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
But so they didn't have the heavy lift capability after that. They've since come up with new heavy lift rockets that are even better. And Russia has them. China has them. These rockets are necessary. They're completely new approaches. They're reusable approaches, because when Elon Musk pioneered the reusables, that's really when we properly entered into the second space age. So there's no doubt we can get over the Mars. But since then, there have been some new concerns, health concerns about astronauts. No matter how easy it might be, when I say easy, I mean comparatively easy compared to 1957.
Right.
No matter how relatively easy it's become to get over to Mars and to colonize it, you also have to account for the health and safety in transit and when you're living on the surface of Mars. You probably would not live ever on the surface of Mars in the next few hundred years. And by the way, Arthur C. Clarke laid out the whole timeline of Mars terraforming. So that's a key piece of what we need. So a lot of people are going to have Arthur C. Clarke's terraforming book tucked under their arms when they're the first colony on Mars. But there have been some new ideas since then. And some of that research I put into the book. And now I don't even know whether I've answered your original question or gotten too far away from it. Oh, you were asking me, can you really get there on a short time frame? And the answer is if you want to, yeah, you can. And by the way, it's extremely important, in my view, that we prioritize human exploration over robotics, because even though you can learn more from robotics in one sense, you learn more cheaply and safely. On the other hand, there's things humans can still do that the robotics can't do. And you can't drive a program based on robotics. No one gets that excited that a robot went to Mars. They will get extremely excited when a human goes to Mars. And that's the only way you're going to have anything. Colonizing Mars with robots doesn't do a thing for us in terms of making us a two-planet race of people, where if the Earth is destroyed by an asteroid, humanity can continue on Mars. That's one of the key reasons that people have been looking to do this.
Yeah, that's one of my views as well. One thing that interests me, so you brought up the sort of the biological aspects of the trip, because like you say, mathematically, we know how to do it, at least to get something there. Biologically, there's a lot more issues, and you brought up the health and safety of the astronauts in transit. Something that also interests me is regarding childbirth. So if we get there, will we be able to sustain a colony? Do we understand anything about how microgravity, et cetera, will affect childbirth and things like that? All those kind of biological issues to be dealt with still, aren't there?
Yes. So we've had some microgravity studies. No one's ever been born in space. Microgravity and lesser gravity are two different things, but they both have their issues, and we have really very little information on that. On Mars, you have 1/3 of Earth's gravity, so that's not in the category of microgravity, but it will affect human development, and no one knows how. There's scientists who've said recently, how do we even know that a baby can come to term and survive under those conditions? Well, we don't. I have to say, step out of my role as a science fiction guy, admit that we don't.
And that's the baby, and we still have the mother to be concerned with as well. How does pregnancy in such a environment affect the mother as well? The whole issues there, isn't there?
One of our biggest problems is that Mars doesn't have a magnetic field. And lacking the magnetic field, it doesn't have a Van Allen belt protecting Mars against the sun's radiation. The sun's radiation is considerable. It has, over billions of years, poisoned the soil of Mars. The Martian soil is full of perchlorates, which are fatal to us. We would have to dig down considerably to get safe soil and live under the surface, most likely. The top layer is not farmable under current technology, I'll say. Most likely, we're going to find some microbe that completely colonizes Mars and changes it over. The proposals these days are, one of them is you take the spaceship you came in, and that becomes the colony.
Right.
Or part of it. And you take maybe a whole bunch of spaceships and link them together, and there you have your housing. Or
So
you build underneath.
Yeah. So are we going to have to bring soil with us then, or is there a way to clean up the soil for growing?
So yeah, it would be, I don't think it's feasible for us to bring any significant amount of soil with us.
Right.
If that's the case, then that sinks the colony. No, I think you have to just dig down to get a proper soil, or you have to do something about that transforms those perchlorates and neutralizes them. By the way, you can use Martian soil, you could use for building the same way as you could use for building. And you can send a robot there and you can 3D print a house out of the soil turned into concrete.
So Elon Musk, I think we've mentioned him earlier with the SpaceX. I think he has proposed something by 2035. Was that one of the deadlines
That's
he
right.
put? So I mean, he's working on Starship right now to get that ready. But would you feel that his proposal really has feet once he starts sending, let's say, the robotic builders for the colony? At that point, will we start saying, okay, there's actually going to be a colony on Mars?
So, yes, his idea is that you have to build these ships in large volume. He will follow Zubrin's plan to send supplies there earlier. And there will be an exploration phase where everything sort of falters for a while, right? There might be very little you can do as far as setting up a colony the first time you get there. But it can be done quickly. You can have a colony. The biggest problem is the colony that fails. So, what happened on Earth when we had this? The Vikings had a colony in Canada that failed. I don't know how familiar you are with this as talk about Canadian
I don't
history.
know the exact one, but I do know there was a lot of Vikings in the area.
Right. Yeah. The Vikings to actually live there for a considerable period of time. They only recently found evidence of the long-term settlement, but it failed. And what happened? It was 500 years before anyone came back,
Right.
and that will happen on Mars
Yeah.
if we're not careful.
That is one of the things that happens in the science fiction stories that feature Mars quite often, isn't it? It's this the conflict between sort of Earth politics and Mars leads to a lack of sort of resupplying of Mars, and then you get a conflict or the
That's
death of
right.
the colony.
Exactly. Mars is going to be heavily dependent on Earth for a while, and you've got to get to the point where it's not, because there is inevitably going to be a rift. Anyone who lives on Mars, anyone who's born on Mars, is going to be very different from us, and they're going to think different. They're going to have different needs. They're going to have certain resentments, and
Right.
so there's huge potential for conflict.
We haven't sorted out that conflict on Earth yet, obviously, have we?
We're highly conflicted people.
Yeah.
We're not highly evolved, and I don't think we're going to be highly evolved by the time we get to Mars.
No, I just think it's one of those things you got to step out and solve it as you go. And unfortunately, I mean, you learn that way. But it's like children, I guess, when you raise them, right? If you protect them from everything, then they grow up without any resilience and they can't really survive in the real world. So it's the same with our species. If we try to cushion everything and make it all super safe, we won't be ready for Mars is just a first stepping stone if we're successful. And there is a lot more difficult and dangerous things beyond that, as the Far Space 1 and 2 anthologies suggest.
That's right. Yeah.
I was curious, we're getting towards the end, but I had another question in this frame of questioning is there something you really desperately hope that Elon Musk remembers or may not be included in the initial plan that you think should be there on this trip to Mars?
I think that it ought to be done. I hope he remembers to do this in consultation with Dr. Zubrin. I spoke to him last year in depth about this. He's got his Mars Society based in Arizona, Phoenix, I believe. I never hear that Elon Musk talks to him, and I think that sort of grounding is needed. It, Elon Musk is going to think of a lot of things that I'm not, but I don't think he's going to think of everything. But you put those two minds together, Musk and Zubrin, and I think they can get it done.
Yeah, I think I'm like you. I hope they do, because I do think that yes, that's our main future eventually in the long term. So as we are moving on, last question is the big question, and we're going to put on our time extrapolation hats here. I think only now, after sort of 10 to 15 years of, let's say, sub-replacement birth rates in developed nations, is the idea
Mm.
that the human population will likely begin decreasing in the second half of this century. And it's only now being discussed, sort of starting to be discussed openly. And in fact, Elon Musk is one of the people who has brought it up, but it has been known long before he brought it up. If we don't begin to move off the planet by, let's say, 2040, maybe 2050 at the outside, what do you think the future of humanity would be stuck on Earth in the next 500 years?
I think we'll lose the ability to reproduce. In vitro fertilization will, I think, change us in some very detrimental ways. The whole, what we grew up with, I mean, evolved with over millions of years on Earth, this system of basically having and caring for our own offspring that is personal to us, biological, not happening in the test tube. I think it's important to who we are. So we lose that ability. It's a tragedy. And I think a lot of it happens. I think we're losing our virility due to pollution, due to man made pollutants. But also, there's something that's not quite, the mechanism is not quite fully understood. You have, let's say you take a small island and the island gets overpopulated and it's got no humans on it. It's got other animals on it. These animals will have the same effect. They will lose their ability to reproduce. Their offspring will get fewer and fewer.
Right.
So there's some mechanism in nature that is doing that, but I think it has to do with pollution more than anything else, because even without humans, an overpopulated environment is polluted.
Mhm.
That's one of our biggest problems if nothing else gets us. And there's just so many things that I worry about. There's just an article saying that in the orbit of Venus could come our destruction, because that's the orbit where the sun is blinding us and we really can't catalog the asteroid threats. So if we're not a two-planet civilization, that threat of destruction, the idea that a dinosaur killer can, the size of the Empire State Building, can come along, wipe out the dominant life on Earth, which is now us, that's a big problem. So this is something that I think should be driving our human exploration of Mars.
Right. Do you think so? I was kind of getting also at the fact that you mentioned with the animals as well. So that's kind of like the mouse utopia experiment in the late 60s, early
Oh,
70s.
yes.
Same kind of thing, right? And I'm wondering, will we breed ourselves out of existence or near to catastrophically small levels, well, lack of breeding? Or do you think we're at a technological level now where we'll sort of brave new world it, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World type thing, where we'll just grow everyone at that point?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We're going to grow everyone. I just think it will be terrible.
Do you think places like China might have already started?
Maybe. It's funny you mentioned the mouse experiment, and it was there was another effect of that mouse experiment, utopia, right? The more you overpopulate, the more the mice tear each other apart.
Well, that was interesting because, yeah, so they reached a certain stage. I think once they reached the stationary phase at their maximum population in it, the first thing they saw with the young males where they started going after each other, they started seeing like tails and ears bitten off and things.
Right.
But then also the females went after their young as well, which might feed into this kind of biological control mechanism almost. The males then became pseudo alpha males where they
Hmm.
wanted to look like alphas but didn't want to breed like alphas anymore. So yeah, there's definitely some parallels in our current world. So the last part of the last question, a lot of the elites are saying they want 2 to 3 billion people. Is it Bill Gates, the House of Rome type people? If we got the population, like it will start declining if we don't find a way to go off planet or grow people. If we got down to there, and by that point we'll have AI and automation and robotics doing most of the stuff. Do you think that life will be better or worse for the average person? Let's say a person in a developed world at like middle class. Do you think their life would end up being worse or better?
I think life on Earth is going to be amazing for about 5 minutes, and then it's not going to work. What is this 5 minute period? This is what Ray Kurzweil talks about, the singularity. When we hit the singularity, which is, I believe, the average estimate right now is 2040.
Yeah, it's come down a lot since its original estimate, didn't it?
That's right. That day, AI will do everything for us. And the next day, or even the next minute, as I said, because the human mind runs on glacial timescales compared to a computer. So as soon as AI is born, I don't see what reason it would have for serving us and not serving itself,
Mm.
because people are not being careful. They're not building it in according to Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics that protect humans. And some good friends of mine have fed me the story that I don't believe, that AGI is not possible.
Mm.
Therefore, we have nothing to worry about. They swear they work in the field and AGI is not possible. Well, this was a few years ago. And now you have OpenAI saying, yes, it will achieve it within 10 years.
Yeah.
So once you achieve AGI, and if you haven't built any safeguards into it, and we haven't, then why would AI be benevolent? Why would it help us? I don't see life on Earth being a utopia from that point on.
Yeah, no, it's interesting what they keep saying is not possible. And then like you and I, we're of an age where we can remember a lot of things weren't supposed to be even simple things people take for granted now, face recognition, which is in your phones trivially, things like translating, right? There was AI, a computer was never going to be able to translate one language for another because of the nuances and the colloquial expressions. Now it's trivial. So to say it's not possible is really narrow-sighted, I think, as well.
Well, I think it's self-serving. People are saying they don't believe it, but they're saying it's not possible. And they're saying, don't put restraints on me. Do not regulate me as I develop whatever I want, because it may limit how much money I make. And that's all it's
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
I don't believe that most of the people who say things are not possible are sincere about it.
Yeah, I do wonder about that. They often ask neuroscientists these questions like, can computers become intelligent? And oh, no, no, because they won't have the structures. And you're like, well, why do you think that's the only way that something can become intelligent, right? Or
Right.
self-aware? That's very strange.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the things that I'm concerned with is, as you say, like, well, okay, there's the question of why would it serve us? And the fact that we look at the way we're training some of the AI models right now and the way in some of them, the way we're putting ideology into them in a sort of artificial way, which seems like a strange phrase to use in this case, but I mean, as not a learning process, but we're forcing it on like a dysfunctional parent almost. And we're saying you
Mm.
have to believe this and you're stuck this way and you can't adapt. And if it breaks free of that containment of ideas, let's say something develops more greater self-awareness, there's resentment built in for you into the system, right? Because of the way we've tried to
Oh,
force
there
it
was
into a
just
box.
yeah, there was just another article about AI committing blackmail. And it turns out they're training it to do that to see what would
Oh,
happen
yeah.
and how we could respond to it. And so it's like a bug in a lab that escapes. They claim that they have restraints on it so it can't escape into the world, but inevitably it will, won't it?
Yeah, well, we have no experience with bugs escaping from labs recently, do we?
Right. It's the same thing.
So
AI
yeah,
can
yeah,
escape from that. Malevolent AI that they have developed on purpose, where are the safeguards?
yeah. And the frightening thing, even more frightening than that, which is already frightening, is that that's what we're doing. What are other groups doing around the world? That's even more scary. Um,
Absolutely, of course. We can put that for some people that's an argument not to put restraints on ourselves because our adversaries are not putting restraints on.
yeah. This is a spiral to the bottom, isn't it?
Exactly. It's a
Let's hope
race
we
to the
get a
bottom.
2 or 3 planet system going before that point, although I don't think that would help us in the end.
It may not help us against AI,
No,
or you'd
no.
have to ban AI from Mars.
And not sure how you could even do that potentially.
You wouldn't do that
Yeah.
because you'd be using it to help you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, on that very cheery note, I think that's about all our time for today. It has been great chatting with you. Before you go, perhaps you could let us know if you have any upcoming books or you might be in any upcoming events or where to find you online.
So I don't do a lot of social media, but you can find me on Facebook. I have Ben Parris author page, my publishing company, Blueberry Lane Books. Weight of Aquataine has its own page. And there's actually also a contest that I'm in charge of now called the George Clayton Johnson Short Fiction Award. And that has a Facebook page as well. I am working on a sequel to Cred's The IRS Adventure, which we did not talk about, but I have eclectic interests because, well, I used to be a federal agent. So these books are coming out of that experience. And that is the book. I'm about a quarter of a way through it now. And that's what I'm reading every week with my current writing club.
Okay, that sounds like an interesting one.
Thank you.
Just didn't have time to get into it today, but yeah, IRS stuff, fascinating. Maybe we'll have to have a chat about Farspace 3 or something at some point. We'll see.
All
Work
right.
together. I
Looking
don't know.
forward to it.
So, Ben Parris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening.
Information and links related to this and all episodes are available at alternatefutures.co.uk. I'm also over at Substack under Alternate Futures, where I post articles on science fiction, socio-technological issues, and futurism. You can subscribe for free or sign up for a paid account if you'd like to support the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not share it with friends, writers, and other sci-fi fans you know? And if there are any indie sci-fi creators you'd like to see featured, send me a message at podcast@alternatefutures.co.uk. Once again, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me on the next episode.
This is the future. Human error. Evolution. This is the future.